Jake Anderson sighed as he climbed the rickety ladder to the roof of WMIL, Millbrook's only radio station. At 28, this wasn't where he'd imagined his life would be, fixing ancient equipment for a station that barely anyone listened to anymore. But in a town like Millbrook, population 15,000 and shrinking, options were limited. "Jake, you got that antenna fixed yet?" Gus, the station manager, bellowed from below. "We're off the air, and the weather service says this storm's gonna be a doozy." "Working on it, Gus," Jake shouted back, squinting through the drizzle at the bent antenna. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. He shivered partly from the chill wind and partly from the growing unease in his gut. As he reached for his wrench, Jake's mind wandered to Sarah. His girlfriend, well, ex-girlfriend as of last week, had finally had enough of his lack of ambition. The memory of their final argument still stung. "You're wasting your potential, Jake," Sarah had said, her green eyes flashing with frustration. "You're brilliant with electronics, but you're stuck in this dead-end job in this dead-end town. Don't you want more?" He did want more. But wanting and getting were two very different things in Millbrook. A particularly loud crack of thunder jolted Jake back to the present. The rain was coming down harder now, making the rooftop slick and treacherous. He gripped the antenna with one hand, wrench in the other, determined to finish the job quickly. That's when it happened. A blinding flash, a deafening boom, and suddenly Jake was flying. No, falling. The world spun around him, a kaleidoscope of rain and lightning and pain. His last conscious thought was a detached observation. Huh, so that's what it feels like to be struck by lightning. Then darkness, beep, beep, beep. The rhythmic sound wormed its way into Jake's consciousness, dragging him reluctantly back to awareness. He cracked open an eye, immediately regretting it as harsh fluorescent light assaulted his retinas. "He's awake!" A familiar voice. "Mom?" "Jake, honey, can you hear me?" "Definitely, Mom." Jake managed a grunt in response. "Oh, thank God," his mother breathed. Doctor, he's awake." The next few hours passed in a blur of tests, questions, and concerned faces. By the time the doctors finally left him alone, Jake felt exhausted but strangely fine. Better than fine, actually. He felt charged, like he'd chugged a dozen energy drinks. "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Anderson," Dr. Patel had said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've never seen anyone walk away from a lightning strike with nothing more than a few bruises. It's miraculous." Miraculous. Right. Jake closed his eyes, trying to process everything. That's when he first heard it. And in local news, Millbrook's own Jake Anderson survived a freak accident at WMIL radio station. Jake's eyes snapped open. The TV in his room wasn't on. In fact, there wasn't a TV in his room at all. "Up next, your weekend forecast?" It was like someone had tuned a radio inside his head. Jake shook his head violently, trying to clear it. The voices faded, replaced by a soft static. "I must be going crazy," Jake muttered. "What was that, honey?" his mother asked, looking up from her magazine. "Nothing, Mom, just tired, I guess." But as Jake drifted off to sleep, the static in his mind shifted and changed, like someone slowly turning a radio dial. In his dreams, he swam through waves of sound and light, catching snippets of conversations, music, and stranger things still. The next morning, Jake woke to find his room in chaos. His alarm clock was blaring, the lights were flickering, and his phone was cycling through apps at lightning speed. As soon as he sat up, everything went dead. Jake stared at the electronic carnage, a wild thought forming in his mind. Hesitantly, he reached out towards his phone, not touching it but focusing on it. The screen lit up. "Holy shit," Jake whispered. He concentrated harder, and the phone floated an inch off the nightstand. A grin spread across Jake's face. Maybe getting struck by lightning wasn't such a bad thing after all. Over the next few days, Jake threw himself into experimenting with his new abilities. He discovered he could hear and manipulate any kind of electronic signal. Radio waves, Wi-Fi, cell phone transmissions, you name it. With concentration, he could even affect the flow of electricity itself. At first, he kept it simple. He fixed his mom's old TV, which had been on the fritz for months, with just a touch. He tuned into private radio frequencies, eavesdropping on police chatter and secret government channels, mostly boring as it turned out. But as Jake grew more confident, his experiments became bolder. He changed traffic lights on a whim, causing minor chaos during rush hour. He made ATMs spit out extra cash, which he always returned, feeling guilty. He even managed to turn every TV in the electronics store to a cat video marathon, much to the confusion of the staff. It was during one of these pranks that Jake ran into Sarah for the first time since their breakup. He was at the grocery store, amusing himself by making the automatic doors open and close randomly, when she rounded the corner. "Jake?" Sarah said, surprise evident in her voice. "I heard about the accident. Are you okay?" Jake froze, the automatic door stuttering mid-open behind him. "Sarah, yeah, I'm good. Great, actually. How are you?" Sarah looked at him curiously. "I'm fine. You seem different, more energetic." Jake couldn't help the mischievous grin that spread across his face. "Yeah, I guess you could say I've had a bit of a shock to the system." Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on his odd behavior. "Well, I'm glad you're okay. Take care of yourself, Jake." As she walked away, Jake felt a twinge of regret. He wanted to call after her to show her what he could do now. But he held back. The time wasn't right. He needed something bigger, something that would really make a splash. That's when he overheard a conversation that would change everything. "Tell you, Johnson, this town hall meeting is our chance," a gravelly voice said. Jake recognized it as belonging to Mayor Hodges. "Once we get the approval for the renovation project, we can start funneling the money into our offshore accounts." Jake's eyes widened. He focused, tuning into the frequency more clearly. "But what if someone starts asking questions?" Another voice, presumably Johnson, asked nervously. Mayor Hodges laughed. "Who's going to ask? We own the local paper, and that dinky radio station barely reaches the town limits. We're in the clear." As the conversation continued, detailing the mayor's elaborate embezzlement scheme, a plan began to form in Jake's mind. It was time for the Frequency Fiddler to make his debut. The town hall was packed, a rare occurrence in Millbrook. Mayor Hodges had promised a big announcement about the future of the town, and it seemed like everyone had turned out to hear it. Jake slipped into a seat near the back, trying to look inconspicuous. "Good evening, citizens of Millbrook," Mayor Hodges boomed from the podium, his expansive belly straining against his suit buttons. "Tonight I'm thrilled to announce a project that will revitalize our beloved town." As the mayor droned on about infrastructure and economic growth, Jake closed his eyes and concentrated. He could feel the waves of electronic signals bouncing around the room. Cell phones, the PA system, even the ancient hearing aids of Mrs. Abernathy in the front row. Jake took a deep breath and reached out with his mind, gently nudging the frequencies, redirecting them. He opened his eyes, fighting to keep a straight face. Any second now. "And so, with your approval, we'll begin construction on—" Mayor Hodges' voice suddenly cut out, replaced by a recording. "Tell you, Johnson, this town hall meeting is our chance. Once we get the approval for the renovation project, we can start funneling the money into our offshore accounts." The mayor's face went pale, then red, then an alarming shade of purple. He jabbed frantically at the microphone, but Jake kept the recording playing, broadcasting it through every speaker in the building. The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs, which quickly turned to angry shouts as more of the mayor's scheme was revealed. Jake watched in amazement as his simple prank snowballed into full-blown chaos. Security guards rushed to the podium trying to hustle the mayor away, but the crowd was having none of it. Mrs. Abernathy, of all people, grabbed onto the mayor's suit jacket, surprisingly spry for a woman of 85. "You lying, cheating scoundrel!" she screeched, waving her cane menacingly. In the ensuing melee, Jake slipped out unnoticed, a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief coursing through him. He'd done it. He'd exposed the corruption and saved the town from being swindled. As he walked home, a spring in his step, Jake failed to notice the black SUV that pulled away from the curb, following him at a discreet distance. In the days following the town hall fiasco, Millbrook was abuzz with speculation. Who was behind the mysterious broadcast? How had they obtained such damning evidence? And what other secrets might they reveal? Jake watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and anxiety. He'd taken to calling himself the Frequency Fiddler in his head. A bit corny, perhaps, but it had a nice ring to it. He made sure to keep a low profile, but he couldn't resist a few more pranks here and there. He made the high school PA system play Never Gonna Give You Up on repeat for an entire day. He caused every car alarm in the Walmart parking lot to go off at once, creating a cacophonous symphony. And, in his personal favorite, he made all the tractors in Old Man Jenkins' farm drive themselves in a perfect circle, creating an impromptu crop circle. Each prank added to the fiddler's mystique. Theories ran wild. Some thought it was a group of tech-savvy teens, others believed it was a government experiment gone wrong. A few of the town's more eccentric residents were convinced it was the work of aliens. Jake was loving every minute of it. For the first time in his life, he felt powerful, important. But with his rising local fame came new complications. First, there was the matter of keeping his identity secret. Jake had always been known as the town's go-to guy for electronics, and now people were bringing him their malfunctioning devices in droves, hoping he could shed some light on the strange occurrences. "I don't know, Mrs. Henderson," Jake said for the 100th time, handing back the old woman's mysteriously reprogrammed universal remote. "Maybe it just needs new batteries?" Then there was Sarah. She'd been watching him closely ever since their encounter at the grocery store, clearly suspecting something was up. Jake wanted to tell her everything, but fear held him back. What if she thought he was a freak? What if she told someone? But the real trouble came in the form of two men in dark suits who showed up at the radio station one sunny afternoon. "Mr. Anderson?" the taller of the two said, flashing a badge. "I'm Agent Cooper. This is Agent Reeves. We're with the FBI. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the recent incidents in Millbrook." Jake felt his heart rate skyrocket. He forced a casual smile. "Of course, agents. What would you like to know?" As the agents grilled him about his whereabouts during various pranks, Jake's mind raced. How much did they know? Had they somehow traced the signals back to him? "One last question, Mr. Anderson," Agent Cooper said, his eyes boring into Jake. "Where were you on the night of the town hall meeting?" Jake swallowed hard. "I was there, actually, in the audience, like half the town." Agent Cooper nodded slowly. "I see. Well, thank you for your time. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions." As the agents left, Jake slumped in his chair, adrenaline leaving him in a rush. This was getting serious. Maybe it was time to hang up the fiddlers. Whatever it was. Fiddlers hung up when they retired. But even as he thought it, a new idea began to form in Jake's mind. If he had the power to embarrass the mayor and pull off harmless pranks, what else could he do? Maybe it was time for the Frequency Fiddler to think bigger. Jake couldn't sleep. The idea had taken root in his mind and refused to let go. He paced his small apartment, mind racing with possibilities and potential pitfalls. The state lottery, over $200 million. With that kind of money, he could do real good. Revitalize Millbrook, set up scholarships, maybe even start his own tech company. And okay, maybe buy himself a nice car or two. But it was risky. The FBI was already sniffing around, and a lottery win would definitely draw attention. Still, if he was careful. Jake sat down at his computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. With his powers, hacking into the lottery system was child's play. He didn't change anything, not yet, just observed, learned, planned. The next morning, Jake bought a ticket, just one. He focused on it, feeling the electromagnetic waves dancing around the printed numbers. With a thought, he aligned them with the numbers he'd seen in the lottery database. The day of the drawing, Jake sat in front of his TV, heart pounding. The numbered balls dropped one by one, each a perfect match for his ticket. He'd done it. He was a millionaire. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyers, financial advisors, and press conferences. Jake played the part of the lucky everyman, saying all the right things about how he planned to give back to the community. But as the initial excitement faded, Jake began to notice things. The same black SUV parked on his street day after day, men in suits watching him from a distance. And Sarah? Sarah was asking questions. "Come on, Jake," she said one day over coffee. A lightning strike and suddenly you're a changed man? And now this lottery win? Something's going on and I want to know what it is." Jake looked into her eyes, seeing concern, curiosity, and something else. Hope? He took a deep breath. Maybe it was time to come clean. "Sarah," he said slowly, "there's something I need to show you." Jake led Sarah to a secluded spot in the park, his heart racing. This was it, the moment of truth. "Okay, Jake," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "What's this big secret?" Jake took a deep breath. "It's easier if I show you." He focused on a nearby streetlight, willing it to flicker on and off. Nothing happened. Frowning, Jake tried again, this time aiming for Sarah's phone in her pocket. Still nothing. "Jake?" Sarah's voice was a mixture of concern and disappointment. "Are you feeling okay?" Panic rose in Jake's chest. His powers. They weren't working. He concentrated harder, reaching out with his mind for any electronic signal he could find. Suddenly, a wave of sensory input crashed over him. Radio signals, Wi-Fi networks, cell phone transmissions, they all flooded into Jake's mind at once. He cried out, falling to his knees as the cacophony of electronic noise threatened to overwhelm him. "Jake!" Sarah knelt beside him, her face etched with worry. "What's happening?" Through the haze of signals, Jake managed to gasp out, "I can hear everything." As if triggered by his words, the chaos in his mind translated into the physical world. Every electronic device in the vicinity went haywire. Car alarms blared, smartphones exploded with notifications, and the streetlights began to strobe manically. Sarah looked around in shock, realization dawning on her face. "It's you," she whispered. Sarah looked around in shock, realization dawning on her face. "It's you," she whispered. "You're the one behind all the strange things happening in town." Jake nodded weakly, still overwhelmed by the flood of signals. I can control electromagnetic waves. Or at least, I could. Now it's like they're controlling me." Sarah's expression shifted from shock to determination. She grabbed Jake's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Focus on my voice, Jake. Block out everything else. You can do this." Jake closed his eyes, concentrating on the warmth of Sarah's hand, the sound of her voice. Slowly, the cacophony in his head began to subside. The malfunctioning electronics around them calmed, returning to normal. How long have you been able to do this?" Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of awe and concern. "Since the lightning strike," Jake admitted. "At first, it was amazing. I could hear radio broadcasts in my head, control any electronic device. But now," he trailed off, looking at his hands. "Now it's getting stronger and I'm losing control." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she smiled, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Jake, do you realize what this means? You have an incredible gift. Think of all the good you could do." Jake laughed bitterly. "Good? Sarah, I used this gift to rig the lottery. I'm no better than the mayor I exposed." "That's not true," Sarah said firmly. "You made a mistake, but you can make it right. Use your powers to help people, to make real change." As they talked, neither of them noticed the black SUV parked at the edge of the park, or the two men in suits watching them intently. Over the next few days, Jake worked with Sarah to gain better control over his powers. They started small, turning lights on and off, changing radio stations. Simple things. Gradually, Jake found he could extend his reach further, tapping into cell towers and even satellites. "This is incredible," Sarah said one evening as they sat in Jake's living room, surrounded by floating smartphones and a TV that was flipping through channels on its own. "But Jake, we need to talk about what you're going to do with this ability." Jake nodded, letting the devices settle back into their places. "I've been thinking about that. I want to make things right, Sarah. I want to use this power to help people, like you said." "I have an idea," Sarah said, leaning forward excitedly. "You remember that big tech company, Neuralink, that moved into town last year? There have been rumors that they're doing some shady stuff, illegal data mining, privacy violations, maybe even human experiments. Jake raised an eyebrow. You want me to investigate them? Sarah nodded. With your abilities, you could access their systems, find proof of what they're doing. We could expose them, just like you did with the mayor. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering. It was risky. Neuralink was a major corporation with serious security. But if the rumors were true... All right, he said finally. Let's do it. They spent the next week planning. Jake practiced extending his powers, tapping into Neuralink's systems from a distance. Sarah researched the company, compiling a list of suspicious activities and potential evidence to look for. Finally, they were ready. On a quiet Sunday night, Jake sat in his apartment, eyes closed in concentration as he reached out with his mind, searching for Neuralink's secure servers. He found them pushing past firewalls and encryption as if they were tissue paper. Data flowed into his mind, emails, financial records, experimental logs. What he saw made his blood run cold. Sarah, he said, his voice shaking, it's worse than we thought. They're not just violating privacy laws. They're developing technology to control people's minds through electromagnetic waves, and they're testing it on unknowing Millbrook residents. Sarah gasped. We have to stop them. We have to tell everyone. Jake nodded grimly. We will, but we need to be smart about this. If we're not careful, Neuralink could make this all disappear, and us along with it. As they began to formulate a plan, neither of them noticed the van parked outside Jake's apartment, filled with high-tech surveillance equipment. Inside, Agent Cooper spoke into his radio. Director, we've confirmed it. Anderson has abilities beyond anything we've seen before, and it looks like he's about to cause some serious trouble for Neuralink. There was a pause, then a crackle of static. Bring him in, Cooper, whatever it takes. Jake and Sarah spent the next day preparing for their big reveal. They decided to use the same tactic that had worked with the mayor, a surprise broadcast during a public event. Neuralink was holding a town hall meeting to discuss their community initiatives, which would be the perfect opportunity. As evening fell, they made their way to the community center where the meeting was being held. Jake could feel his powers humming beneath his skin, ready to be unleashed. Remember the plan, Sarah whispered as they slipped into the crowded auditorium. Wait for my signal. Jake nodded, trying to calm his nerves. He watched as Neuralink's CEO, a sleek woman in an expensive suit, took the stage and began to speak about the company's commitment to Millbrook's growth and prosperity. Sarah squeezed his hand. It was time. Jake closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind. He felt the familiar pathways of electricity and data, following them to Neuralink's servers. With a thought, he began to download everything. Every incriminating email, every unethical experiment log, every piece of evidence they'd discovered. Then he turned his attention to the auditorium's sound system. As the CEO continued her speech, her voice suddenly cut out, replaced by Jake's own. Citizens of Millbrook, Jake's voice boomed through the speakers. What you're about to hear is the truth about Neuralink and their activities in our town. The auditorium erupted into chaos as Jake began to play the evidence, recordings of secret meetings, details of mind control experiments, plans to use Millbrook as a testing ground for their technology. On stage, the CEO's face had gone pale. She was shouting something, but no one could hear her over Jake's broadcast. Security guards began to push through the crowd, heading straight for Jake and Sarah. We need to go, Sarah said urgently, tugging on Jake's arm. But Jake stood his ground, concentrating on maintaining the broadcast. Just a little longer, he said through gritted teeth. They need to hear everything. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the chaos. This is the FBI. Everyone remain calm and stay where you are. Jake's eyes snapped open. Agent Cooper was striding towards him, flanked by a team of agents. Behind them, he could see more agents converging on the Neuralink executives. Jake Anderson, Cooper said, his voice grave. We need you to come with us. Jake looked at Sarah, then back at Cooper. He took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. But first, let me finish what I started. To his surprise, Cooper hesitated, then nodded. Make it quick. Jake turned back to the crowd, his voice echoing through the auditorium once more. People of Millbrook, you've heard the truth. Neuralink isn't here to help our town, they're here to exploit us. But now you know. Now you can fight back. As Jake lowered his hand, the normal sound system kicked back in. The auditorium was silent for a moment, then erupted into cheers and applause. Cooper put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "All right, son. Time to go." As they were led out of the auditorium, Sarah walking beside him, Jake couldn't help but smile. Whatever happened next, he'd done what he set out to do. He'd made a difference. Jake sat in a sterile interrogation room, his hands folded on the table in front of him. He'd been here for hours, answering questions about his abilities, about Neuralink, about everything that had happened in Millbrook. The door opened and Agent Cooper walked in, followed by a stern-looking woman in a crisp suit. "Mr. Anderson?" the woman said, taking a seat across from him. "I'm Director Hawkins. I hope you understand the gravity of your situation." Jake nodded slowly. "I do. But I also hope you understand why I did what I did." Hawkins studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "We've been aware of Neuralink's activities for some time. We were building a case against them, but your intervention has complicated things." "I couldn't just stand by and let them hurt people," Jake said firmly. "No, I suppose you couldn't," Hawkins replied, a hint of a smile on her face. "Which is why I'm here to offer you a choice." Jake leaned forward, curious. "Your abilities are unlike anything we've ever seen," Hawkins continued. "They could be incredibly valuable in the right hands. So here's the deal. Work for us. Use your powers to help protect people on a national scale, and we'll drop all charges against you." Jake blinked, stunned. "And if I refuse?" Hawkins shrugged. "Then we'll have to treat you as a threat to national security. I don't think either of us wants that." Jake was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he looked up at Hawkins. "Can I make one request?" Hawkins raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "Sarah comes with me," Jake said. "She's brilliant and she keeps me grounded. I need her." Hawkins and Cooper exchanged a look. Then Hawkins nodded. "I think we can arrange that." Jake smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "Then you've got yourself a deal, Director." As they shook hands, Jake couldn't help but wonder what new adventures awaited him. The Frequency Fiddler was about to take his act national, and he had a feeling things were about to get very interesting indeed. As Jake walked out of the interrogation room, Cooper fell into step beside him. "Welcome to the team, Anderson," Cooper said, a hint of a smile on his usually stern face. "I have a feeling you're going to shake things up around here." Jake grinned. "You have no idea, Agent Cooper, you have no idea." And with that, Jake stepped into his new life, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Frequency Fiddler's greatest performance was yet to come. The end.